Maybe I could start with you, Zach, and you, Annie. Both of your films are quite different, but in certain ways they sort of emerge out of the familiar and the familial, but you take these home spaces and turn it into something by turns sort of fantastical, psychedelic, surreal, cosmic at points. Maybe you could speak a little bit about the sort of plays that you're doing with space.
Sure, yeah. I think few of my previous films have used public spaces or locations as ways of kind of staging or mapping what I think of as kind of flows of desire and anxiety, longing, despair, and I was interested in seeing how that would kind of play out in a domestic space. So I started to think about the package as this sort of carrier, the thing that kind of expresses a porousness of the boundaries of the home, something that like contains the object, but also a sort of residue or a thread that connects that object to sort of vast global system of manufacturing and circulation, and that this is a kind of thinking about that in terms of the domestic as a kind of like it's a kind of infection or something that we invite into our homes, and that as a moment of something that could possibly trigger a kind of like psychic disturbance. I think additionally, the point of origin for the piece was this audio track that plays at the first 2 minutes, for the most part unedited, some appropriated audio that I had friends of mine sort of reperform or reenact. And so that really sort of set the stage for what followed, which was something that was for sure kind of playing out in a domestic space.
I guess I was thinking about the domestic space as a place where we do a certain kind of labor, and as a space we associate with feminine labor, and trying to, also as a space that often we think of as like a retreat from public life, a retreat from political life, from politics. And I was trying to use that space to do some creative work, and not just, I mean, like creative, making a film, obviously, but also I think there's like a distinction between the kind of actions that we perform at home, the kind of work that we perform at home as being like not building work, not making work, but sort of repetitive, care, cooking, that kind of domestic labor is something that doesn't generate anything beyond itself. So I was interested in taking that space and reimagining it as a space where you could do a different kind of labor, the kind of labor usually I would do in my studio space. So sort of like transposing that work back into the home was interesting and exciting for me.
Questions from the audience for our guests? Yes, please. Question is for James about the use of Bach.
Yeah, there's a number of reasons. I guess the first is I really like Bach, and I like the sort of contrapuntal, multi-voiced nature of his oeuvre, I guess. And also, I grew up. My mom's sort of amateur organist, so I grew up listening to that music, kind of infusing, I guess, like the domestic space. And so it sort of has a, well, I actually used it also to calm my baby for the first kind of 6 months. A mixtape that my friend gave me with Bach and like a number of other compositions. And yeah, so there's just sort of a kind of personal, but then also very sort of technical, voice-based reason, I guess, yeah.
More questions from the audience for our guests. Ed, maybe you could talk a little bit more about the context for Remembrance, a Portrait Study, maybe how it circulated when it was first produced and first released at all, if you know much about it.
Sure. Remembrance had 3 different titles. You might have heard in the beginning, he says No More Tomorrows. Later, he retitled it Edward Owens Towards Fiction, and then he finally titled it Remembrance, a Portrait Study. This film, I'm not really sure where it showed at the time, but it was noted by Parker Tyler in Underground Film of Critical History as an important film of that year. And I also know that there were 2 different ways in which Edward had shown it. He showed it with sound originally, like you saw it here. But after seeing it, I believe Gregory Markopoulos and Parker Tyler told him that he should try it silently. And so he started showing it silently. So it shows kind of both ways. Owens knew Jonas Mekas at the time and borrowed his camera to make some of his films. I don't know if it was this one specifically, although it probably was because he didn't make that many. Although actually maybe it wasn't, because this one was actually shot in Chicago, not shot in New York. He went home to Chicago, and then who you see is obviously his mother as a kind of central figure, and then his aunt and his mother's friend as well. And very briefly, you see a photo that I do believe is him, because I have other photos of him at the time, and his eyebrows are very striking, and you can kind of see that that's him. So yeah, but Jonas was ready to give him his first solo show in New York, and I believe that what happened is that Edward had a drug overdose kind of issue with psychedelics, and had a near suicide attempt, and then kind of left New York at age about 20, went back to Chicago and never made another film. He kept up correspondence with Charles Boltonhouse and Parker Tyler for decades until Tyler died in the 90s, early 90s. But yeah, other than that, he didn't really have a filmmaking life after this. I find this very poignant because what I discovered after Edwards' death is that he was very close with his family, as you can kind of get from this film. And they had no idea about this part of his life. They were all very, I've talked to his nephew. They were close with their uncle, but they really didn't know about this part of his life at all. So this was all a great surprise to them after his death as well. And they were, very moved to see that. I mean, they knew these women as well. Obviously, this is his nephew's great aunt, I guess, or aunt. I can't do family math in my head. So it's unclear, but it doesn't seem that he got that solo show because of those circumstances.
If there's any questions from the audience, please don't hesitate. Yes. It's 16. Well,
I feel like I went into that.
You have a bit of you have an interesting mix of video and 16 in yours, Zach. Maybe you could speak.
Yeah, I mean, I shoot mostly on 16 color for a variety of reasons. But yeah, for this piece, I was interested in the way that the sort of textures of the film would interact with this other type of material, most of which was appropriated, sort of bits and pieces that I had found and collected over time. Yeah, I mean, I think like in a really kind of straightforward way in Billy, those things are pretty much divided up along the lines of interior and exterior. Again, I don't know if I can speak to any sort of like precise or defined reason why that decision was made, but it just sort of, as I was working on the film, became sort of, I guess, interested in that interaction between the media.
Annie, do you maybe want to say a word about?
I work in video as well as in film, and in this case, I wanted to be working on my own. And to me, the tools that are easiest to work with at a very small scale is just a Bolex. So I was using it for that reason. But also, I think because I was looking for a sort of inverse proportional translation of the way time happens within the family home, which is very dispersed and sort of limitless. And I wanted to find something that could sort of harness that and put a limit on it, and that with 16, because of the nature of the medium and the cost of the medium and how long it takes to get the images back, it was a really good way to sort of give me some limitations that were productive.
I might just add that just from a technical perspective, in this section lies, it's three rolls of 400-foot 16 millimeter film. So each angle is limited to the extent of one of those rolls, give or take, minus like bits and pieces of the heads and tail, depending on how it was loaded, I guess. So having that like structure was a huge like decision-making point, I guess. Yeah.
So you're touching on the visual structure. Maybe you could speak a little bit about the structure of the text, which kind of switches perspectives. You're switching first person, second person, third person.
Yeah, and every angle too also has a different grammatical voice associated with it for purposes of, I guess, argumentation and maybe
Point, counterpoint.
Yeah, trying to. I guess I really want to try to turn a monologue into like a discourse or a conversation. And try to shift between narration and confession and just sort of I guess experiential observation or something like that. And yeah, so in a lot of ways it's a super structured movie that started like the 16 millimeter was the kind of basis, I suppose, and also my sort of like love-hate relationship with it, to be honest, and also feeling like whenever I make 16 millimeter, it never is it, it's embalmed in this digital medium, which I also appreciate for its flexibility. So, yeah.
Other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
James, when you were invited to the festival, did you wonder how you were filming in a city? I don't think we have Dunkin' Donuts.
There are a few.
Huh? It's Tim Hortons, yeah. You will have Dunkin' Donuts, I'm sure, at some point. Yeah, it's proven tricky in different screening environments.
What about Europe?
Europe, it's weird. I think there's like one in Denmark or something. But people
Is there
know.
a festival there?
Yeah, there's more festivals than Dunkin' Donuts. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question though in terms of I think it's like legibility and maybe this idea of like are movies supposed to be universal? I feel like in like the film industry world, like producers are like, make the story universal, let's reach everybody. And I just really don't care about that or believe in that.
More questions from the audience? Yes, please.
James, I hate to ask you this, but were you thinking at all of guitar?
I was thinking about a lot of things. It's funny. I'm not like a big like film historical influence guy. Being like I made this movie because of this and this. But I really appreciate the way. Like, admittedly, I've absorbed stuff, and so another thing that people bring up is like Hollis Frampton's Lemon. And yes, like that's all part of it. But I didn't make this movie because of it. It's sort of like living life. It's just you just sort of a bucket full of experiences, I guess. Yeah, a cup full of experiences.
It percolates.
Yeah, it percolates.
Well, and one last question, please.
I'm just curious if you will be renaming the MoMA.
He knows.
He was here. I think that's all the time we have. Please join me in thanking our guests for being here and for their work. Thank you all so much, and thank you all. Have a nice night.